I'm just going to turn it over to you, Doug. Get us started, and we can head back in the way we did.
Yeah.
However you'd like to go, though.
Yeah, I'm not going to talk for too long here because you've been waiting and probably want to see this beautiful property. I'm Doug Still. I'm the former city forester in Providence, and I have a master's in forest resources from Penn State a long time ago. Are you familiar with the term forest succession? Do you know what that means? So it means that as over centuries and thousands of years, maybe, or at least hundreds of years, forests change. They're not static things. That there's some species that come in if there's a disturbance, and humans are probably the biggest disturbance that we have, clearing and agriculture and that sort of thing. But when left on its own, the forest will go through certain stages of reestablishment, and that first succession tends to be trees that like to grow out in the open, full sun, without much competition. And after that, other later succession, so the second phase, types of trees will seed in and become established beneath that first succession group of trees, because they need some more shade and protection from the wind, better soil, and they can grow in the understory types. So the first type of trees in the first succession would be like, maybe walnut, black locust, black cherry. We're going to see these today. A few others. Pitch pine, near the water in this region. And then oaks and beech trees and other types of trees will be this kind of the secondary types. Here, because this was a farm and fields, you can really see some of those patterns, especially along the edge, and then as we get inside it. But there's an incredible diversity of trees and species right here. So there was always disturbance. The indigenous people here would have fire and do clearing, because that would help with wildlife and for hunting and that sort of thing, and creating sort of diversity. But it would be a lot of black oak, maple, Tupelo. It would be sugar maple. So there would be we're gonna see what will be here. Everything that was there before is here now, but just in a different kind of structure.
What about like chestnut? Then we lost a few.
We lost yes. We have, that's one of the things we're going to look at, because we found something. But the American chestnut was one of the most prominent species in the northeastern, in all of our forests in the eastern side of the country. And at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a blight, chestnut blight, that wiped them out. And there are still stumps in the forest that put up sprouts, and there are still American chestnuts around, but you'll see them usually as smaller types of trees, and then the blight will eventually find them and they'll get knocked back. Now there's extensive breeding or hybridization programs going on now. The American Chestnut Society, and each state and area has its own sort of chapter. There are fields in southern Rhode Island of American chestnuts are being crossed with an Asian chestnut. So there's, I forget, 3 or 5% of their genetic makeup is this Asian chestnut, which is resistant to the chestnut blight. And they're hoping that will someday be able to reestablish the American chestnut in the forest. So that was a predominant species that was here before. Why don't we head out? This tree is called a swamp white oak, which is different than a regular, like a white oak, which is more common. The swamp white oak I've been planting as a street tree, both in New York City and in Providence for many, many years, and we always knew, it's native, it's a native tree, but I've never seen it really out in the woods until I came here, and I was like, that is a big swamp white oak, and you can tell. Let's see, all the leaves are falling. It has. So I don't know if you're too familiar with oak trees. There are many, many different species. There's a white oak group and a red oak group. And the red oaks and black oaks are very closely related and very difficult to tell apart. And they have pointy lobes on the leaves. The white oak group generally has more rounded lobes. I'm not sure I picked the best one. Can you see that? How the lobes on the edge of the leaves are rounded. So it's part of the white oak group, but it's a swamp white oak, and it grows in very wet soil near rivers and swamps, and it makes an excellent street tree because wet soil lacks oxygen, and urban soils lack oxygen below pavement. So it's very compacted. So it can survive. There's a number of bottomland trees that do well as urban trees. This is one of them. But here it is just growing on its own. And this one, I can't tell you how old it is. I'm guessing it's probably 100 years old. It's been here a long time. And its prodigy are sort of all around. There's another one, really nice one over there. They have the rounded lobes, and the younger branches and twigs have like this peeling bark, and it's supposed to do that. Everyone's like, "Oh, the tree looks sick." No, it's one of the features of swamp white oak. And I think they're gorgeous. They're beautiful. That's one right behind you, younger than this one. They get to be very large, and they can live hundreds of years.
We haven't had a drought. That part is almost like a river at times, so it makes sense you're saying wet.
Yeah, it's a very wet spot right here, the way it comes down. Is anybody familiar with this tree or heard of it before?
No? Frankly, I think I would always just keep moving past it.
And those like wet soils as well, but red maple grows almost anywhere in dry soils, wet soils. Has everyone ever been to the red maple swamp on Cape Cod and Fort Hill? So it's a swamp. It's like these channels of water with planks, walkways that connect paths all through this gorgeous forest of red maple.
And what town is it in?
It's in Eastham.
Oh, Eastham.
Eastham, Fort Hill. And I grew up on the Cape, and we always used to go there when we were kids and run around the red maple swamp. But this is exactly the type of habitat, or similar habitat to that. Swampy, sort of near the ocean thing. Red maples are one of the most common trees in the eastern United States too. Huge range all the way from Florida up into Canada. And so one would expect to find that here. And some of the trees are right in this section larger and older than some of the ones that we're going to find at the edge of the field over here. So I have a feeling that this spot might not have been cut over quite like the fields over here. I'm guessing. There's this great book called Reading the Forested Landscape, which he shared, and you got that book, right?
Yeah.
And it's about becoming able to recognize the patterns in forests and what might have been there before, and the way that European settlers and Native Americans might have used the land, and what might have happened there before. And there are all these interesting things that you wouldn't notice if you were just taking a walk in the woods. One thing that I thought was very interesting was looking at stone walls, and according to this author, if there was a field nearby, like you create the walls, they created walls because they were clearing a field, and if it was used for livestock versus crops, if it were grown for crops, you would see many more small stones in the walls. Why? Because the land was cleared, and through the freeze thaw, all the little stones kind of move up into the soil and come to the surface, and they wanted to clear them so that they could plant and plow, and they would just take all the small stones that kept popping up and putting them in the wall. But a field that was more for like cows or whatever, they wouldn't be doing that, and walls would be big stones. So things like that this guy thought of. What's that?
Leave the stones for the cows.
That's right. This field was for livestock. This farm. Many things. They're looking at mounds and anyway, we can share it somehow. Maybe a link to it.
Yeah, I can get an email from everybody.
The black locust is a first succession tree. It grows in the open. It'll grow in empty lots, open fields. It likes that situation. And then slowly other things will grow up underneath it, and then they fall in storms. They're very
What's the time frame?
weak wood. They grow, it's hard to tell. This tree that fell, we could go count we could count the rings, but that's probably like a 50 or 60-year-old tree, I would guess. They grow rapidly at first, and they tend to grow very tall and weak, like they'll eventually just break. But as they grow, shrubs and other things grow beneath them, and the forest eventually then becomes something else. The wood on black locust is it's funny. They break in storms, but the wood is really resistant to rot and is strong when you make the Parks Department in Providence. We would look, whenever we took down a black locust, we would make, we're going to make benches out of it, or fence posts, or different things. They're always hungry for another black locust to use, because we're reusing wood or that sort of thing. So it's a little bit schizophrenic in that way, because they just break in storms. But it's great for reusing. It doesn't decay a long time to rot.
Doug, they call it ironwood too.
I call a lot of things ironwood. There's 4 or 5 different trees called ironwood. So probably.
Well, I think back to when we were burning wood. We would cut black locusts, and they were really, really tough to split.
Yeah. It's very hard. I don't know if you can burn it. Does it do well in a fireplace?
Well, you got to dry it out, but it'll burn well.
Once it gets going, it throws a lot of heat, but it's harder to dry. harder to get going.
This one fell in a storm and it's sending up sprouts. It's becoming a new tree. And they come, I've seen stands of them that just become a tangled mess. You know, they fall on each other, and so it's great that there's another use for them, because then you don't feel bad clearing them out.
Do you recognize them by the trunk or by the leaf?
So let me find a leaf. The black, here we go. The black locust, I don't know if you've heard of there's two different sort of general leaf shapes. There's simple and compound. And a simple leaf is like, well, I don't know what this was, but like this. It's just one blade. And the way it attaches to a twig, there's a bud at the base of the leaf stalk, or the petiole, and that's going to become next year's leaf on a simple leaf, one blade. But a compound leaf has multiple blades on it, little leaflets, they're called leaflets. This had one fell, but 2, 4, 11 leaflets on this. But this is one leaf. It's a compound leaf. And each one of these leaflets does not have a bud. It's just coming from the stalk. And the bud grows down here. So this falls off the tree, there's still a bud left on the twig, and then a new one of these will grow next year. So you can recognize black locust as having a compound leaf. And I recognize it easily by the bark, so I've just gotten used to it, but it's sort of like a crisscrossing pattern to these ridges on the bark. And it's not a regular pattern exactly, but it's sort of crisscrossing with deep furrows as they get along. And if you look up into the canopy, it's not like a dense cave. It's more of an open, dappled light that lets through. They have pretty flowers in the spring, white flowers. Bees like them.
But we went
So
left,
much
you know.
better though. This is a Norway Maple. So this is an exotic.
But it's also a compound
Europe.
leaf.
It does not. It has. I'm just gonna rip a branch off. All right. See if I can. Well, I don't know if you can see this, but it's a simple leaf in that there's one blade, and if you can look up the branch patterns, the twigs and all the leaves are opposite each other along the twig, so it's one of these species. These either alternate along the twig or they come in opposite. And there are many fewer species that have opposite branching, and so it's easier to remember those and recognize it. But all maple trees have opposite branching. So it's opposite, and it has it's different than a red maple, which has 3 main lobes to the leaf. The Norway maple has 5. It's sort of broader, and it turns yellow. It has a yellow fall color, whereas the red maple has something red about it usually. This is a red maple right here. Not really turning red right now. It's spoiling my there. The up, yeah, the top.
Why is it called a Norway?
It's from Europe.
Okay, so it was transplanted.
Yeah, and it was planted a lot. After elm trees, we lost. Our towns and cities were lined with American elm trees. It was gorgeous. My latest podcast episode is about the American elm in early New England, so hope you can listen to it. It's really good. I have this expert on who's really good. Anyway, Dutch elm disease came and wiped out the American elm. It's an exotic fungus. And one of the problems was that it was a monoculture. There was just so many American elms planted and lack of diversity along the streets. So it was devastating when they died and we lost them all. And what did they do? They came in and they planted this, the Norway Maple, and a lot of them. There was an inventory done of the street trees in Providence in 1988, and nearly 50% of the trees were Norway Maple. Some towns had even more than that. And we hadn't planted any since '88, or very few, and the number came down. Now it's below 10%. But they're highly invasive into the woodlands. And so they have those seeds that, they're like two wings. There's two seeds together, and with a wing that's shaped like a mustache, and the helicopters. And they get everywhere. You're probably very familiar. Get in your garden, pull out the seeds, and they got into the woods. In Providence, Blackstone Park, and a few others, there would be dense stands of Norway maples in the woods, about 100 feet off the street where they originated from. And then you go in further, and there aren't anymore. So this got here somehow, but not a native tree. One way to recognize a Norway maple from any other maple is that when you pull a leaf off, like I just did, there's a little bit of milky sap, like right at the base. This is just one sort of key to Norway maples, the milky sap at the base of the leaves. But they create very dense shade, and not a lot of things can live underneath them. They were a really successful tree in terms of cooling our cities and creating shade and cleaning the air, but they just pushed everything out. So now we prefer to plant many different types of trees, stressing natives when we can, especially near natural areas. But you would expect to see a Norway maple along a field, a lot, and seed in along fence lines. They grow anywhere.
Are they a first growth?
You know what? I don't know. Like, in their native habitat, I don't know what they are. Usually, I would think they're almost kind of both, because they seed in where even in empty lots and open areas, but nothing can grow beneath them. So it seems like once they're here, that they're going to dominate. So one of the special trees that we saw on our walk before, and I went, oh! I saw it was this one here, and another one right up, maybe right there. I can't see into the sun. So this is a chestnut. And I can tell by the long, pointy leaves on it. And the edges of the leaves are toothed. And I can just tell they're very long and pointy, kind of canoe-shaped leaves. And we found the chestnuts. Here's one. They're really sharp. Get it.
Oh, wow.
And it had something got the chestnut out of it, with a smooth chestnut in the middle.
Now, are those edible chestnuts, like you roasting on an open fire?
So, possibly. I thought there's a chance this could be an American chestnut, and it's a chance it could be an Asian type. There are a few others that have been planted that deceive you. So if it is an American chestnut, it would be very unusual that it would get this tall. There's even a bigger one right over here. Oh, just the ground's littered with them over there. This one is huge.
I know, it's nice to see.
And so the likelihood that it's an American chestnut this big just makes me think it might probably something else. And they'll be like, oh no, that's the Asian chestnut. Someone planted it from over here.
You can see all the...
Normally it would be like this, sprouts that come up and looking a little scraggly. Not like perfect.
Yeah, I don't think this is something that we can roast over an open fire or
No.
in the oven.
If Jim
So
ever
maybe
catches
it's,
up with them, I want him to see these treasures.
That looks chestnut.
I would think you could.
Oh, you think?
Chestnut. I mean, I just think that.
Yeah, that's true.
This tree is not related to a horse chestnut that's planted in landscape with a compound leaf. Comes out. The horse chestnut has fruit that looks sort of like that, but one large
big
nut
one.
in the middle.
And those are not edible.
Not edible.
Oh, okay. That was my. So, what are the chestnuts that are edible? The American chestnut.
The American chestnut.
And then, but are the ones that you get in stores?
Some of them have.
There's a European chestnut. It's probably that.
Like the ones that you would buy to roast.
Yeah, in Italy there's a lot of chestnuts.
Yeah, somebody.
Oh, they do? Keep the spiders away?
My husband's English, and I collect
The
woodworms,
Grimm
and I collect them and put them in the corners of the windows and the door and whatever for the winter. And they do keep the spiders out.
That's the first I've heard about that.
So many.
How
I
come?
debate. I don't know, but I debated bringing them back here. But I wondered what I would.
Whatever chestnut.
We have
At the airport.
we have some great folk wisdom here that horse chestnuts keep spiders away inside.
But there's plenty of horse chestnuts in the
It's just after you
But these are all pretty young trees, and they can be a first succession tree. That swamp white oak's been here a long time though. So I'm wondering if when the fields were cleared, a lot of times an oak would be kept like at the corner of a property, kind of like mark the boundary, a boundary tree. And we'll see, I know there's more like that as we continue walking. So they'll keep a few of the oak trees and then it'll be a field. And I think that they must have left, some of the swamp white oaks here as boundary trees, and then they're feeding in again. Whereas the red maple just grows anywhere, and they're starting to. I think if we were here 60 years ago, this would look very different. It's been open. So that is a hickory. It's a hickory, probably pig. This is not pignut hickory, it's bitternut. I can tell by the yellow buds, but yeah, that's one leaf. They have a compound leaf and like sort of one big one at the end. Like that. It's a lovely tree, great native tree. I'd love to see more hickories. It's going right along the edge. Somehow it got here. There must be others in here in the forest.
But this
we
is
can't
not
see.
hickory, that's a bitternut, you said.
This is a bitternut hickory.
Oh, it's a type of hickory.
Yeah. Great tree. But we also, along the water, I noticed a number of black oak trees. They're native to the forest, but they were left, some of them are quite large, and they were left alone. And that oak tree there is a black oak. And they're beautiful when they start to spread, and their branches can reach out, for quite a ways. They're probably the most common tree in Rhode Island forests, the black oak.
Can you explain again the difference between black oak and white oak?
So the black oak has pointy lobes to the leaves. don't have one with me. But very like sharp with deep lobes in between. And a white oak just curves all the way around. There's the red oaks too also have the pointy lobes to them. Usually a bigger, broader leaf than a black oak, but they're quite difficult to tell apart unless you look at the buds, you can tell. And generally when I see an oak out in the woods in Rhode Island, I think, oh, that's going to be a black oak. Yeah. And there's more hickory. This one, let's try and find the largest one. It's hard to tell. That could be one right in there, that tall one.
Oh, the big one.
Yeah, I think that's a big hickory tree.
Okay.
That's spawning the others.
That's probably where they started.
Yeah. So we're almost at the Tupelos, right?
Yep.
So there's a couple very interesting trees in this area. Some of my favorite. The first one that I want to point out is the sassafras. And so this tree here, you can see it silhouetted against the sky. And some of the leaves look like mittens. Sometimes it's one of its features. Some of the leaves don't have any lobes, and some will have one lobe like a mitten, and some will have two, like one on each side. Can you see that? And it's a lovely native tree. They usually grow in colonies. They'll send out roots and more will pop up. And beautiful fall color. Usually, often they turn sort of reddish. This one isn't. But one thing that I find beautiful about them is that the leaves will have multiple colors. Like some will turn yellow and some will turn maroon. And it makes this nice effect. So that one in there is a sassafras. It likes kind of wet soil. Usually it's near a water body of some sort. There's probably more.
The same sassafras you used to make root beer?
I believe so. What if the original root beer was made from something else though?
Yeah, there's an artificial.
Yeah, sarsaparilla.
There's a lot of sassafras where I grew up in Maryland, and as a kid we would pull them up and sniff them.
Yeah.
And they smell like root beer.
That's right. Right. I think that you can.
The only thing is you really don't want to make real root beer from them because they're carcinogenic. So
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And the sarsaparilla. Oh no, the original root beer was from sassafras, and it made kind of like a foam when they did it, but it was carcinogenic. Thanks for reminding me. Now it's all artificial, I think.
It's all pretend.
Yeah. So another one of my favorite trees is, there's a few in here, but you can see some better over here, is the Tupelo, or black Tupelo. So the Tupelo tree grows it really likes wet soil. In general, you find it along the banks of ponds and kind of marshy areas. And it grows in colonies as well. It sends out roots and new ones will grow up. And that's exactly what's happening here. You've got this big tree and then these other smaller trees that grow straight up right out of the ground, sort of around it. But they may even be genetically the same. They're basically growing from the root system of this tree to form new trees. And in fact, they have some of the best fall color of any tree. They turn sort of magenta red sometimes. One of the first to have their leaves fall. And so I actually wrote an article about tupelos on Cape Cod, where I've been spending a lot of time, especially through COVID. I was exploring the woods out there. And as I said, generally you find them along ponds and stream beds and stuff. And I was walking on a hilltop, and suddenly, on Cape Cod, it's all pitch pine and black oak, very uniform. And then suddenly, everything changed, and it was a different type of tree. I'm like, these are Tupelo trees. What are they doing on a hilltop? They're not supposed to grow here. And there was a grove of them. I didn't realize they grew in groves. And so I said, that's funny. Maybe I found something unique. And then I was sort of lost in the woods, and I would use it in the future to find my way. I was trying to get to the ocean. It's like,
Till the leaves fell off.
you had to go past the Tupelos, and that's the path of the Tupelos. It's like, I got to find more of these Tupelo groves. So I started looking for them on the Cape, and I couldn't find them for a while. And then I started to find them. And there are some in Truro, in this marshy area. It's sort of like hedgerows of blackberry and arrowwood and other stuff, low, like maybe this tall. And then suddenly there's this dome of green that rises up over it. And it was a grove of Tupelo trees growing in almost like brackish water. And you went and go inside it. It really felt like a dome. And you go inside and it felt a little bit like a different world. So I wrote this article about that. We can share that maybe. About finding Tupelo groves. It was like a metaphor for, I don't know that. Exactly. And I found them even out in Provincetown. But they're more uniform, they're more commonly found in Rhode Island, I think, than out in the sand of Cape Cod. But this is exactly where you would expect to find them, in sort of a wetter site next to a pond. And they're easy to pick out even in the winter, and you can start to see it. The branches have lots of twigs, like this network of twigs that come out.
Oh, I see.
So if you see that, there's a pattern that you get used to seeing. So in the winter, you can see like a group of them, and then they have the twiggy appearance. You can get to recognize the Tupelo any time of year.
Do I remember you saying this used to be a really common tree, and it's not so much now?
It was never, so I did a lot of research on them, and Tupelo's never a dominant tree in any forest, but it's often it is the longest lived hardwood tree east of the Mississippi. So they can grow, there's one that's 700 years old, they estimate, in New Hampshire. And it's a late succession tree generally, although it was growing in this marshy area. And it can grow in the understory below other trees for decades or 100 years or more. And then eventually it gets its chance, and it'll grow up and become the dominant tree, or at least in that area. But it's never like a Tupelo forest. It's like a grove of them somewhere, and then they kind of just intermixed with other things. But they're highly adaptable. So I learned that they're not just along water bodies, but they can be on hilltops, and they can grow in a variety of different situations. And wildlife love them. The flowers attract bees. Have you heard the song Tupelo Honey?
Yeah.
It's a different species, but that's in the south, like northern Florida, southern Georgia. Ogeechee Tupelo or something like that, but they make a specific type of honey from the bees that feed on the flowers of that type of Tupelo. But even here, bees love the flower, the nectar, and then there's little black fruit it's called a drupe, that all wildlife, like to eat. It's a fantastic tree.
So what looks like an oak behind here, the small one, right
Here,
there?
yes.
That has kind of rounded leaves. What kind of oak is that?
I still think that's a black oak. When an oak tree, it can have variable size leaves depending on how much sunlight it's getting, and so when it's lower down, when it's shaded out, these leaves will get, the lower leaves will get bigger and broader to capture more light.
So they don't look as pointy.
No, right now it's just, it's a little, because of that, it's a little deceiving. Ground cover, these low shrubs are most likely huckleberry. There may be some blueberry. It's often mixed with blueberry. I don't know if there's any blueberry here. There might or may not be. They're very difficult to tell apart. But I really tried during COVID. I was like, I have to figure out what this is and how to tell the difference. And when it flowers, the huckleberry flowers are like pink bells that hang down, and the blueberry flowers are white bells that hang down. So I can tell when it's flowering, I tell the difference. And then obviously with the fruit, you all know what a blueberry looks like. And a huckleberry is similar, but a little smaller and darker without that downy, without the white kind of blush on it. But I think it's very pretty New England thing. You kind of don't notice it. It's nondescript. But all this stuff here, most likely huckleberry.
But these berries.
This is, and what he's holding now is greenbrier, which is all this pointy stuff with these blueberry. Yeah, it makes these berries that look like you can eat them, but you can't. So here's this other little Tupelo growing up. The roots must be coming from somewhere. And this is a large sassafras that's hanging over the path too. You can, once you start to get used to it, the leaves, you can tell the leaves because it's like a foot or it's a mitten. I thought we'd play a little game and see if we can ID the trees from 200 yards away based on what we know. Yeah. So let's try. Like, you see those, there's a group of trees there that rise up like Horton Hears a Who trees.
Yes.
What do you think those are? Close. Black locust. Those are the black locusts. You know, edge of field trees, although they're in the woods over there. They're mature. But that's kind of pretty, right? The way it rises up above. But you can tell by the sort of feathery leaves and the compound leaves that are up above. How about that red tree over there? I'm not even sure what it is. Yeah, I would say that's a red maple. Most of the color we see are red maples right now, I think. Anything different? Let's see. Well, we know what that big green tree is, right? Yeah, that's our black oak that haven't started to turn at all, and big and broad and spreading. There's one over here we didn't talk about yet, but it rises up above everything, and it's
With barely any leaves, that one?
with barely any leaves, but then there's tufts of leaves on the top.
Right.
That I know is a poplar, because that's what they do. For some reason, the leaves drop, and then there's a little tuft at the end.
I thought they were more straight up instead of feathering out.
Yeah, they can, when they get bigger, they spread out. I don't know why they do that, but
That's where the disease started, or where the research was being done about the disease?
the disease is from Europe.
From Holland?
Probably. Yeah.
That's why
It may
she's
not
asking.
have anything to do with it, but I
Yeah,
asking
no, we're not blaming anybody. But it's from Europe.
really. Really?
And so the American elm hadn't evolved to fend it off. And so it really
Most
affected
Europeans
them.
were Dutch, it was that maybe.
Yeah.
Well, the first ones who were coming here probably
But I'm
said,
sure there are diseases and insects that originated here that have gone to other places in the world that are affecting trees. So it's just sort of like that, unfortunately. One horrible one, actually I'll mention two, Debbie Downer, is a new one called beech leaf disease. Have you heard of that? So it's within the last 10 years, and it's affecting American beech trees. We might have passed one. There aren't too many around here. And it's a predominant tree in New England forests, the American beech. But it is it's called a nematode. So it's a little microscopic worm. And it gets in the twig and then the leaves. And it's really easy to see because my hand's not like a leaf, but like in between the veins, it'll be a black streak. And I've gotten good at IDing them. Anybody can do it once you see it. And then slowly the tree dies, and it's killing beech trees. They found it, where did they find it? They found it in Pennsylvania, I think. And so how did it get out there? Because it's isolated, and there's ocean all around it. And so my guess, and the guess from other people, is that it's transmitted by birds. And somehow these little worms or something get on a bird, and then they fly and it gets on them. So it's moving pretty quickly. I can't explain any other way it would have gotten there.
There's a large beech tree that is imported and grows in many places. It was planted, and I don't know, is it golden beech? Or
European beech?
European beech?
Yeah, and copper beech is a type of European beech.
Does that disease affect those?
It does. It does. I don't know if as much, but yeah, they found it in that too. As if that tree doesn't have enough enough problems because there's another disease that's affecting them. So it's a really, they're not sure exactly what's going to happen, but it doesn't look good. I mean, you can treat individual specimens of beech trees, but you can't treat a whole forest. So, fortunately, that's the one thing. What was the other thing I was going to? Oh yeah, emerald ash borer, EAB. So it kills pretty much only ash trees. So green ash or white ash or any type of ash. Green ash are the most common. Thankfully, it's not a predominant tree in Rhode Island, but there are green ash in the woods, and a lot planted as street trees. And it finally got here. It's a little beetle, and it's green, a metallic green color. And it can't be controlled, and it was first detected in Ohio, I think, and spread in the Midwest and southern Canada, and finally it was detected here in 2018. I was trapping for it in Providence, and in 2018 we found 2 beetles, and then the next year we put the traps out again, and then they were covered with them. So
it hasn't found its way the other way.
So the curve is that upon discovery, it's a 5-year curve when the trees start to die. And that was 2018. And so 2023 is coming up. And we had started seeing trees suffering from it already, but I think next year you can treat it. So there's different chemical treatments, and some are more environmentally sound than others. But you can treat them, And I think that next year will probably be like the last year you can start putting the trees on a treatment cycle to save them. They should get treated every other year. This one type of treatment, it's every 3 years. And for how long, you know, I don't know. They've been treating trees much longer in Chicago and other places. So they're out ahead of us and can tell us what happens later. You have to keep treating the tree for the rest of its life. But it's a devastating insect for green ash. In the Midwest, they plant in the northern states a lot of green ash just because it's such a tough tree and effective tree in cold climates. And so it was more devastating to them than it is here. But we're really going to start to see the dead ash trees in Rhode Island in the next couple of years. It was kind of like, you know, it was in the news, but nobody really paid attention.
Which one?
I'm wondering if that poplar that we saw was a cottonwood.
Oh.
This is one other tree we hadn't seen yet. This is a gray birch. Also a first succession kind of tree. And it usually grows near water, like a lot of the ones we've been seeing today. In some of the islands in the lakes in Roger Williams Park in Providence, they're covered in gray birch because they just grow along the on the banks of ponds, and they have a really pointy leaf. They're kind of like really long point at the end, and the bark looks like birch tree, but like a paper birch, but it doesn't peel. It has the lenticels on it, which are these lines, like a white bark with black lines on it. And usually a gray birch has sort of like these black triangles underneath the branches. This one doesn't have it as much. You can see those triangles.
Yeah, instead of going straight across.
Yeah. So a pretty common tree in Rhode Island. So we had a question about climate change in trees. And I would say for trees it's a little bit of a complicated issue on what the effect of climate change is going to be on tree species. And for some, it basically means that some of the trees that have like their lower zone limit is going to change and move north. And there are some species that were at the lower limit, like a paper birch, like a birch, different types of birch trees. Sugar maple actually were kind of at the lower edge of their range, and they're going to suffer here over the long term. It's just too hot. There's some trees that are going to benefit from climate trees. Yeah, the palm trees. Like sweet gum trees that you think of. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a type of tree that has 5 pointy lobes to it, like a star. And they're starting to seed in around here, and they were planted in parks and that sort of thing. And they're thriving. They're really from like Appalachia and down that, and more southern regions.
Are they the ones that when they have the droppings, they look like the COVID?
Yes, they look like the COVID. Very pointy seed balls.
Up across from
Yeah, when you have one, it's not fun actually cleaning them up all winter long because they don't drop all at the same time. They drop here and there all winter long. And then some colleagues of mine planted a whole street with them once. I'm like, oh my God, what have you done to the people in the future? But there's also more carbon dioxide in the air thanks to, it's the whole reason for climate change. And some plants and trees thrive in that situation, whereas others just, the heat and not going to help them. With more frequent storm events, though, we're going to have more blowdowns, and that affects many of the trees, at least in urban conditions, salt spray and stuff, things near the ocean. So there are a number of factors that you wouldn't normally you think of just the heat, but it's can be more rainfall here. We've had so much rain recently, which can help or hinder. More carbon dioxide in the air.
And more drought this year.
More drought sometimes, more fire and or stronger fire events, stronger storm events. So it's a kind of a complicated mix. It's hard to say it's bad for all trees. The Forest Service put out this really interesting guide, and they have a whole list of different tree species and broken out by zone, and this sort of rating system of this species is going to benefit, this is not going to, or somewhere in between, depending on where you are. And it's a really handy resource, I think, for managers to use when you're doing species selection for planting. That this one you might want to stay away from because over the long term it's not going to do well. So that's sort of my complicated answer about trees and climate change.
I had heard that the Appalachian Mountain Club did a study and compared photographs, and the tree line has moved visibly higher as time's gone on. Trees are surviving at higher altitude, warmer.
Yeah, absolutely. The trees are going to adjust to their conditions.
Not relevant to Rhode Island.
Right.
We don't have any tree lines.
Right.
Over mountains.
Yeah.
And then just getting with floods near the ocean, what does that mean for the soil and salting in and that sort of thing?
It's like that book Rising starts talking about the Tupelo Grove that was at Jacobs Point and Warren that is no longer there.
Oh yeah.
Because of the brackish.
Right, they couldn't take it.
I think just a regular maple tree, it was normal, grayish bark. Now it is black, it's blackened. It's just a mold or whatever, something attacking it.
On a maple tree?
Yeah, I thought so.
I've seen that on linden trees and other types of trees. I don't know what that is specifically, but sometimes aphids will feed on the leaves or something else that puts out a sugary, they excrete this sugary substance that gets on the bark, gets on the leaves or drops, and then this the black sooty mold comes in and feeds off the sugars from that. So there's it's like a chain reaction, and that might be what you're seeing there. It could be that the black on there is the sooty mold from another insect feeding on the leaves.
Doesn't sound good.
It was to simulate that, and it's really more of an art project.
Do you think this is out of Roger Williams University?
Yeah.
So I think it has to do with projecting sea level rise on these pegs. Yeah, you can't see it from that side, but I don't understand it fully yet.
Well,
We could look it up.
come out here during the next hurricane and check it out.
Right.
That's unusual. I think it's a willow. It looks like a willow oak.
One way up.
Yeah. Would not expect that here at all.
But it's halfway down there.
It's this big one.
Yeah.
It looks like a willow oak, which is a southern tree. It's here. Another one.
See, climate change in action, right?
Yeah. It's climate change. I got a question about if you wanted to learn more about tree identification. Is there a good resource? And there are lots of them. But I was describing the book that I learned on back in the 90s. And it's, again, well, I think we're going to have to follow up with some of the references later. It's a book by William Grimm, and I think it's called Northeastern Trees or Eastern Trees. And I used it a lot when I was learning. And it's mostly, it doesn't have photographs, it has line drawings. And you can really see, like, get the essence of what you're looking for in terms of opposite or alternate, which I talked about, or simple versus compound, the lobes on the leaves, the veins on the leaves, shapes of the seeds and stuff like that. So I like that one a lot.
What's his name again?
William Grimm, Grimm. And yeah, now there'll be a run of them on Amazon. Probably no one's ordered the book in like 20 years. William Grimm, Illustrated Book of Trees. The comprehensive field guide to more than 250 trees of eastern North America. That's a great book. And I was saying it has the perfect amount of description. It doesn't go on and on. It's like 2 paragraphs probably, and it talks about the range, that sort of thing. So that's a great book. It also has a key in it, a dichotomous key. Anyone familiar with that? What that is?
Right, it just asks you questions. It's a decision tree, basically.
Yeah, it's like a series of binary choices.
Is it this or is it that?
And it starts from the most general and then to the specific. So it'll usually, like, the first question is it a broadleaf tree or is it an evergreen? And then if it's B, then it'll send you down to the section where all the conifers are. If it's A, then the next question is inevitably, is it opposite or alternate branch pattern? And there are many more alternate than opposite, and it'll send you to the opposite section. So you're getting closer and closer to your answer. And then it'll ask you, is it simple or compound leaves, like what we talked about? And that breaks it up further. And then it gets into, some you can know right away because of one thing, or others you really have to get into the shapes of the lobes, or what the seed looks like, and that sort of thing. So it's great to use that key, and I think it's still a great way to learn because you really have to think about what you're looking at. The other thing you can do, if you want to skip over all of that, is this great app. It's called Picture This, and I was like, yeah, I know all of them, and then I was like, why not? And so I tried it, and I think it's amazing. I can't believe how good it is. And I learned a few things, of unusual things that I found. And it just takes a few seconds. You're not really understanding why it's that. And that's why I think it's good to learn it the other way too. But it's remarkable.
A plant that you can just do under your photograph.
You
just slide your photograph and it will plant. And if you get a quick enough.
So that's Picture This?
That's not even an app.
Oh, that's just on your phone.
Just my phone. If you have a picture, like of a leaf, I did some of yours, you're holding. And if I slide it up, it says, whoops, that one it didn't.
I don't know about this.
Yeah, a friend of mine showed it to me a week or so ago. If I find a good leaf, but you literally just...
So the phone just starts identifying it for you?
You just slide it up. It worked on one of the others.
Just slide it up and it's like, this is a...
Yep.
Realizing you were looking at a lot of...
That's amazing.
I just slid up the picture and it says, look up plant.
You don't even need me. You just like...
No, I didn't do it for half of them. My pictures weren't good enough. But I think if I went, it might do it on
That's amazing. I thought Picture This was very good, and it taught me all these unusual things.
It's also beautifully usable. I know what's in my garden.
Yeah, right.
And I was using it more on shrubs, so I didn't even know that it would work on these trees.
There was a subscription, like there's a basic one, and then this, I forget how much it was, $27 or something. I mean, it wasn't
this is just
cheap, but it was, it worked. So thank you all for joining, and my apologies again for for being a little late, but I enjoyed the walk and seeing that all with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you can find us,
Doug had mentioned a number of resources, and what I'll do is put together what I can remember Doug has offered to check it, add to it, and then we'll get it sent out. And then if others of you have other resources you think would be useful, maybe we can share some of those too. So.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
and he's going to talk to you again.